The hallways of Ridgewood High buzzed faintly with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, casting a sterile glow over the polished tiles. It was lunch break, and most students had already spilled out onto the quad or gathered in clusters near lockers, laughing and gossiping about weekend plans. But not Emily Carter. She lingered behind, her footsteps echoing softly as she made her way toward the girls' bathroom. A sanctuary she'd come to rely on when the weight of the world became too much to bear. Emily wasn't one to draw attention to herself. At 15, she carried an air of quiet determination, her head often buried in books or notebooks filled with meticulous notes. Her grades were impeccable, her teachers praised her diligence. And yet, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Not since the rumors started. It began innocently enough. A whispered comment here, a snicker there. Then came the accusations. Someone claimed they saw her copying answers during a math test, though she hadn't so much as glanced at another student's paper. Others joined in, fueled by jealousy over her academic success and resentment toward her reserved demeanor. Before long, the whispers turned into outright hostility, leaving Emily feeling like an outsider in a place that once felt safe. And now today, it had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. Cornered. As Emily pushed open the door to the bathroom, relief washed over her, momentarily. The space was empty, save for the soft drip of a leaking faucet and the faint scent of disinfectant lingering in the air. She leaned against the sink, taking deep breaths to steady her racing heart. Outside, the noise of the school faded into a distant murmur, replaced by the sound of her own thoughts spinning wildly. But the respite didn't last long. The sharp click of heels against tiles signaled someone approaching. Emily froze, her pulse quickening as the door swung open. Principal Harper strode in, her expression cold and unyielding. Clad in a tailored pantsuit and carrying a clipboard, she looked every bit the authoritative figure she prided herself on being. Yet there was something unsettling about her presence, a predatory glint in her eyes that sent chills down Emily's spine. "Miss Carter," Mrs. Harper said, her voice clipped and accusatory. "I've been looking for you." Emily swallowed hard, clutching her backpack straps tightly. "Principal Harper, is something wrong?" "You tell me," Harper replied, stepping closer until she loomed over Emily like a storm cloud. "There are allegations regarding your conduct during Friday's exam. Care to explain yourself?" I don't know what you mean," Emily stammered, her voice trembling. "I followed all the rules. I didn't cheat." Harper narrowed her eyes, leaning in until their faces were mere inches apart. "Don't lie to me, young lady. Witnesses claim otherwise. And let's be honest. You've always been precocious, perhaps a little too eager to succeed." The accusation stung, but Emily refused to back down. "That's not fair. I worked hard for my grades. You can't just accuse me without proof." "Oh, but I can," Harper countered, her tone dripping with condescension. "As principal, it's my duty to uphold standards. And if certain measures need to be taken to ensure compliance." She trailed off ominously, reaching out to grab Emily's wrist. Pain shot through Emily's arm as Harper tightened her grip, her nails digging into tender skin. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she bit her lip, refusing to cry in front of this woman who seemed intent on breaking her spirit. "This isn't over," Harper hissed, releasing her abruptly. "Expect consequences." With that, she turned on her heel and exited the bathroom, leaving Emily shaken and alone. For several moments, Emily simply stood there, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes red-rimmed, and her wrist bore faint red marks where Harper had grabbed her. Betrayal and fear churned within her, threatening to overwhelm her entirely. But then anger surged, a burning ember igniting in her chest. How dare Harper treat her this way? What gave her the right to decide Emily's fate based on baseless accusations? Summoning what little courage she had left, Emily straightened her shoulders and wiped away her tears. She wouldn't let this ruin her, not completely. With resolve hardening her features, she stepped out of the bathroom and nearly collided with Mr. Willis. An unexpected ally. Mr. Sam Willis paused mid-mop stroke, startled by Emily's sudden appearance. His weathered face softened immediately upon seeing her distress. Though he rarely interacted with students beyond polite nods or brief greetings, he prided himself on noticing things others overlooked. The cracks in the walls, the squeaks in the floorboards, and sometimes the pain etched on young faces. "Oh, there, easy," he said gently, lowering his mop. "You okay, kiddo?" Emily hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. Janitors weren't exactly confidants, after all. but something in his warm, concerned gaze put her at ease. Slowly she nodded, though her quivering lip betrayed her attempt to appear composed. "No, you're not," Mr. Willis observed, setting them out aside. "Come on, take a seat." He gestured to a nearby bench tucked beneath a row of lockers. Reluctantly, Emily sat down, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Mr. Willis crouched beside her, his hands resting on his knees. "What happened?" he asked softly, his tone inviting rather than probing. At first, Emily hesitated. Talking about it meant reliving the humiliation, the injustice. But as she looked into Mr. Willis's kind eyes, the dam broke. Words tumbled out in a rush, her frustration with the bullying, the false accusations, and finally, Harper's aggressive confrontation in the bathroom. "And she grabbed me," Emily exclaimed, holding out her wrist to show the red marks. "Like this. I didn't do anything wrong, but she acted like I'm some kind of criminal." Mr. Willis examined her wrist carefully, his jaw tightening. Years of working behind the scenes had taught him to recognize signs of abuse, both physical and emotional. This wasn't discipline. It was cruelty masquerading as authority. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said quietly, his voice tinged with anger. "No one deserves to be treated that way, especially by someone in charge." Emily sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her sweater. "What am I supposed to do? Everyone thinks I cheated. Even if I tell the truth, no one will believe me." Mr. Willis placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe not everyone, but sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen. You're stronger than you think, Emily. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." His words struck a chord deep within her. For the first time in days, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Not because she believed everything would magically improve, but because someone else cared enough to stand beside her. Seeds of justice. As Emily calmed down, Mr. Willis promised to keep an eye on the situation. He couldn't intervene directly without risking repercussions, but he vowed to look into Harper's behavior discreetly. Over the years, he heard whispers from other students about her harsh tactics and favoritism. Perhaps Emily's case wasn't isolated. Perhaps it was part of a larger pattern. For now, though, Emily needed to focus on protecting herself. Mr. Willis advised her to document everything, every interaction, every accusation, every bruise left behind. Evidence mattered, especially when facing someone as powerful as Harper. "I'll figure something out," he assured her. "In the meantime, stay strong." "Okay." Emily nodded, managing a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Willis, for believing me." He smiled back, patting her shoulder gently. "Anytime, kiddo. Anytime." As Emily walked away, her steps lighter than before, Mr. Willis watched her go, his expression thoughtful. This wasn't just about helping one student. It was about exposing a system that preyed on vulnerability. And if anyone could shine a light in the darkness, it was him. Little did he know this moment would set off a chain reaction neither of them could have anticipated. The janitor's closet was dimly lit, its shelves cluttered with cleaning supplies and spare light bulbs. To most students and staff, it was just another utilitarian space, a place where mops were stored and maintenance logs kept. But for Mr. Sam Willis, it had become something more, a refuge, a planning ground, and now a safe haven for Emily Carter. After their encounter in the hallway, Mr. Willis invited Emily to join him there, away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. She hesitated at first. After all, hiding in a janitor's closet felt like admitting defeat, but something in his calm demeanor reassured her. He wasn't offering pity, he was offering protection. And right now, that meant everything. Inside, Emily sat perched on an upturned bucket, clutching her backpack tightly as if it could shield her from the storm brewing outside. Her wrist still bore faint red marks from Mrs. Harper's grip, though they were beginning to fade. The emotional scars, however, ran far deeper. "You know," Mr. Willis began, leaning against the wall with a broom in hand, "when I was your age, I dealt with my fair share of bullies, teachers included." Emily looked up, surprised. "Really? What happened?" Mr. Willis chuckled softly, though there was no humor in his eyes. "Let's just say I learned early on that people in power don't always use it wisely. Sometimes they abuse it, and when they do, silence only makes them stronger." His words resonated with Emily, stirring a mix of fear and defiance within her. Fear because confronting authority figures like Mrs. Harper seemed impossible. Defiance because deep down she knew he was right. Silence hadn't protected her so far. It had only emboldened those who sought to harm her. "But what can I do?" Emily asked quietly, her voice tinged with desperation. "If I tell anyone else, they'll just side with her." She's the principal. Everyone listens to her. Mr. Willis nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the validity of her concerns. That's true, to a point. But even the strongest walls have cracks. We just need to find them. Whispers spread. Meanwhile, outside the confines of the janitor's closet, rumors about Emily's supposed cheating scandal continued to spread like wildfire. By lunchtime the next day, nearly every student and teacher had heard some version of the story. Some claimed she'd been caught red-handed swapping answers with classmates. Others insisted she hacked into the school's grading system. The details varied, but the message remained consistent. Emily Carter was guilty. Mrs. Harper fueled the fire subtly, planting seeds of doubt during faculty meetings and casual conversations. "It's unfortunate," she said one afternoon, shaking her head dramatically as she sipped coffee in the teacher's lounge. "Such potential wasted on dishonesty. Perhaps stricter measures are needed to ensure integrity moving forward." Her words carried weight, not only because of her position, but also because many already viewed her as infallible. Over the years, she cultivated an image of stern yet fair leadership, masking her manipulative tendencies behind polished speeches and carefully curated policies. Few dared to question her decisions, not even the assistant principal, Ms. Rivera, who often deferred to Harper's expertise despite occasional misgivings. For Emily, navigating the hallways became a daily ordeal. Students avoided eye contact or whispered behind cupped hands as she passed. Even teachers treated her differently, assigning extra homework or scrutinizing her work more closely than usual. It was as if she'd been branded with an invisible scarlet letter, marking her as untrustworthy in the eyes of her peers. Yet amidst the isolation, small acts of kindness began to emerge. A few brave souls, a shy freshman who slipped her a note saying, "I believe you," or a senior track star who offered a supportive smile, reminded Emily that not everyone had turned against her. These gestures, though fleeting, gave her strength to keep going. Investigating patterns. While Emily struggled to cope with the social fallout, Mr. Willis launched his own investigation into Mrs. Harper's behavior. Years of working behind the scenes had taught him how to observe without being noticed, and he put those skills to good use. He started by eavesdropping on private conversations between Harper and other staff members, lingering near half-open doors or pretending to clean nearby offices. What he overheard confirmed his suspicions. Harper frequently singled out certain students, accusing them of misconduct based on flimsy evidence or outright fabrications. Those who challenged her faced swift retaliation, lower grades, revoked privileges, or outright expulsion. Next, Mr. Willis scoured old records tucked away in forgotten filing cabinets. Among them, he discovered disciplinary reports detailing incidents eerily similar to Emily's case. One file described a junior accused of plagiarizing an essay after Harper allegedly intercepted a draft email sent to a tutor. Another documented a freshman suspended for inappropriate conduct following a heated argument with Harper during class. Each record painted a damning picture of systemic abuse hidden beneath the facade of academic excellence. Yet presenting this evidence wouldn't be easy. Harper had allies scattered throughout the administration, and speaking out risked alienating him from colleagues who valued job security over justice. Still, Mr. Willis refused to give up. If anything, the mounting injustices only strengthened his resolve. For too long, he'd stood silently on the sidelines, witnessing cruelty disguised as discipline. No more. A warning ignored. Determined to escalate matters, Mr. Willis approached Ms. Rivera, hoping to enlist her support. As assistant principal, she wielded enough influence to challenge Harper's decisions, if she chose to act. "I need to show you something," Mr. Willis said one evening, cornering her in her office after hours. His tone was urgent but measured, betraying none of the frustration boiling beneath the surface. Ms. Rivera raised an eyebrow, intrigued but wary. "What is it, Sam?" "You know I'm swamped with end-of-semester evaluations." "It's about Harper," he replied, pulling out a folder stuffed with documents and photographs. "She's been targeting students unfairly, using intimidation tactics to maintain control. Look at these files. They're proof." Ms. Rivera flipped through the materials quickly, her expression darkening with each page. When she finished, she sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. "This is troubling. But what do you expect me to do about it? Going up against Harper is career suicide." Mr. Willis leaned forward, his voice firm. "Doing nothing is worse. Every day we stay silent, another student gets hurt. Is that really the legacy you want to leave behind?" Ms. Rivera hesitated, torn between duty and morality. Finally, she shook her head. I'm sorry, Sam. I can't get involved. Just be careful, okay? Her dismissal stung, but Mr. Willis understood her reluctance. Change required sacrifice, and not everyone was willing or able to pay the price. Still, her refusal only solidified his determination. If no one else would stand up to Harper, then he would, finding strength. Back in the janitor's closet, Emily found solace in sharing her fears and frustrations with Mr. Willis. Their conversations ranged from practical advice, document everything, emails, texts, even voicemails, to philosophical musings about fairness and resilience. You remind me of someone, Mr. Willis admitted one afternoon, handing her a steaming cup of cocoa he'd brewed using a portable kettle. My late wife. She had this fire inside her, this unwillingness to back down, no matter how tough things got. Emily smiled faintly, touched by the comparison. Do you think I'll ever feel like that again? Like I can fight back? You already are, Mr. Willis replied, his voice steady and encouraging. Every time you walk into school, despite the whispers, every time you refuse to let Harper define you, you're fighting back. Don't underestimate the power of standing tall. Inspired by his words, Emily decided to take a bold step. That night, she wrote a detailed account of her encounter with Mrs. Harper, including photos of her bruised wrist and timestamps of key events. She emailed copies to trusted family members and friends, ensuring that evidence existed beyond her control. Though daunting, the act left her feeling empowered. A spark reignited within her. If Harper thought she could silence Emily, she was sorely mistaken. Building momentum. As days turned into weeks, Emily and Mr. Willis worked together to gather more allies. Through discreet inquiries, they identified former students who had endured similar mistreatment under Harper's regime. One by one, these individuals came forward, adding their voices to the growing chorus demanding accountability. Their efforts culminated in a secret meeting held in the boiler room after hours. Gathered around a makeshift table constructed from toolboxes and plywood, the group shared stories, strategized next steps, and vowed to expose the truth no matter the cost. We may not win, Mr. Willis acknowledged, addressing the assembled crowd. But staying quiet guarantees failure. So tonight, we choose to fight. Emily nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. For the first time in months, she felt hopeful, not because victory was assured, but because she wasn't alone anymore. And so, armed with courage and conviction, Emily prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Whether triumph or tragedy awaited, one thing was certain: the battle for justice had only just begun. The boiler room was unusually quiet for a space typically filled with the hum of machinery and the hiss of steam pipes. Instead, it buzzed with whispered conversations and nervous energy as Emily, Mr. Willis, and a small group of former students gathered around the makeshift table. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust, a stark contrast to the polished halls of Ridgewood High. Yet here, hidden beneath layers of concrete and steel, they felt safe, or at least safer than anywhere else in the school. For Emily, this meeting marked a turning point. No longer was she alone in her fight against Mrs. Harper. She now stood alongside others who shared her pain and determination. Still, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders. Exposing corruption required more than courage. It demanded strategy, patience, and an unshakable resolve to see things through, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Mr. Willis opened the discussion, his voice steady but firm. All right, everyone. Let's get organized. We got momentum, but we need a plan. Something solid enough to bring Harper down without putting ourselves in unnecessary danger. He glanced at Emily, offering her a reassuring nod before addressing the group. Emily's already taken the first step by documenting her experience. Now we build on that. Each of you has a story to tell, evidence to share. Together, we'll piece it all together into something undeniable. Gathering evidence. Over the next few days, the group worked tirelessly to collect proof of Mrs. Harper's misconduct. They divided tasks based on individual strengths. Some focused on retrieving old records from forgotten archives, while others reached out to additional victims willing to speak up. Emily and Mr. Willis took charge of coordinating efforts, ensuring that every piece of evidence aligned seamlessly. One key player emerged during this process: Marcus Chin, a tech-savvy senior known for his coding skills and knack for hacking into secure systems. Though initially reluctant to join, "I've got college apps to worry about," he protested. Marcus couldn't resist the challenge once Mr. Willis explained the stakes. "Think of it as your final project," Mr. Willis joked, handing him a flash drive containing partial data recovered from outdated school servers. Great a material if we pull this off. Marcus grinned, cracking his knuckles. All right, let's do this. But if I get caught, you're writing my recommendation letter. With Marcus on board, the investigation accelerated rapidly. Using advanced software, he uncovered deleted emails between Mrs. Harper and select faculty members discussing everything from grade alterations to disciplinary threats. One particularly damning thread revealed Harper pressuring teachers to fail certain students whose families couldn't afford private tutoring, an unethical practice masked as academic rigor. Meanwhile, Emily focused on gathering testimonies from current and former students. She created an anonymous online forum, encouraging victims to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. Within hours, responses poured in, detailing instances of verbal abuse, unfair suspensions, and even physical intimidation. Reading through them brought tears to Emily's eyes, not just because of the suffering described, but because she realized how many lives had been impacted by Harper's cruelty. Facing doubts. Despite their progress, doubts lingered among the group. Some worried about potential backlash. Others questioned whether ordinary citizens could truly challenge someone as powerful as Mrs. Harper. Even Emily struggled with moments of self-doubt, wondering if she was strong enough to carry the weight of leadership thrust upon her. One evening, after another long day of strategizing, Emily confided in Mr. Willis. "What if we're not ready?" she asked, staring blankly at the wall of the janitor's closet. "What if we mess this up and make things worse?" Mr. Willis set aside the mop he'd been using to clean graffiti off a locker, turning to face her fully. "You won't mess it up," he said firmly, "because you're not doing this alone. Every single person involved is counting on each other, including me. And trust me, kiddo, I don't back down easily." His words bolstered Emily's confidence, reminding her that strength wasn't about facing challenges solo. It was about leaning on others when needed. With renewed determination, she threw herself back into the mission, channeling her fears into action. Building alliances. As evidence mounted, the group decided it was time to reach out to external allies, people outside the school system who might lend credibility to their claims. Mr. Willis suggested contacting local journalists known for investigative reporting, believing that media attention could pressure higher authorities to intervene. Emily hesitated, wary of drawing public scrutiny. What if they twist our story? Or worse, what if no one believes us? It's a risk, Mr. Willis admitted, but staying silent guarantees nothing changes. Sometimes shining a light is the only way to dispel darkness. To ease her concerns, Marcus proposed creating a digital dossier, a comprehensive presentation combining documents, testimonials, and video interviews. This would serve as both a safeguard and a tool for presenting their case clearly and concisely. "We'll control the narrative," Marcus explained, typing furiously on his laptop. "If anyone tries to discredit us, we'll have proof right here." The team spent countless hours refining the dossier, ensuring accuracy and authenticity. By the time it was complete, they had a compelling argument ready to present, not just to reporters, but also to school board members and district officials. A dangerous gamble. While preparations continued, tensions within Ridgewood High escalated. Mrs. Harper, sensing unrest, doubled down on her authoritarian tactics, issuing stricter rules and harsher penalties. Students walked on eggshells, terrified of crossing her path, while teachers grew increasingly uneasy under her watchful eye. Emily bore the brunt of Harper's ire, subjected to daily interrogations and unwarranted detentions. Yet instead of cowering, she used these encounters to gather additional evidence, recording conversations discreetly and noting inconsistencies in Harper's explanations. One afternoon, after being summoned to Harper's office yet again, Emily returned to the janitor's closet visibly shaken. "She knows something's going on," she whispered, clutching her phone tightly. "She accused me of conspiring with malcontents to undermine her authority." Mr. Willis frowned, concern etched across his face. "Did she mention anyone specific?" "No," Emily replied, shaking her head. "But she kept saying things like, 'This isn't over, and you'll regret crossing me.' It felt threatening." Realizing the situation was becoming dangerous, Mr. Willis urged the group to accelerate their timeline. "We can't wait any longer," he said during their next meeting. "Harper's getting desperate, which makes her unpredictable. We strike now, before she silences us completely." Though risky, the decision galvanized the team. They finalized plans to present their findings at an upcoming school board meeting, where Harper was scheduled to deliver a report on student conduct. Timing was critical. They needed to catch her off guard while ensuring maximum exposure. Courage amid chaos. The night before the meeting, Emily sat alone in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling as sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if they failed? What if Harper retaliated against her family? What if no one cared? But then she remembered Mr. Willis' words. Every time you refuse to let Harper define you, you're fighting back. Slowly, she reached for the notebook beside her bed, flipping to a blank page. In bold letters, she wrote, I am brave. I am strong. I will not be silenced. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of resolve. Whatever happened tomorrow, she vowed to stand tall, knowing she wasn't alone. And so, as dawn broke over Ridgewood High, Emily prepared to step into the spotlight, not as a victim, but as a warrior determined to reclaim justice for herself and countless others. The Ridgewood High Auditorium was unusually quiet for a school board meeting, a stark contrast to its usual role as a venue for pep rallies and theater productions. Rows of plastic chairs sat neatly arranged, occupied by teachers, parents, and community members who had shown up expecting routine updates on budgets and policies. No one anticipated the storm about to erupt. At the center of the stage stood a podium draped with the school's crest, flanked by seated administrators and board members. Mrs. Harper sat confidently at the forefront, her tailored suit immaculate and her expression radiating calm authority. She shuffled through papers, preparing to deliver what she believed would be another self-congratulatory speech about maintaining discipline and academic excellence. But hidden among the audience were Emily, Mr. Willis Marcus, and several former students, all armed with evidence and resolve. Their plan was simple yet risky. Interrupt Harper's presentation mid-speech, presenting irrefutable proof of her misconduct before she could spin the narrative in her favor. Timing was critical. Hesitation meant failure. As Harper rose to address the crowd, Emily exchanged a nervous glance with Mr. Willis, who gave her an encouraging nod. Her heart pounded like a drum, but she reminded herself why they were here, not just for justice, but for every student who had suffered under Harper's rule. The explosion. Harper began her speech with practiced ease, her voice smooth and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. As principal of Ridgewood High, I am proud to report that our commitment to excellence continues to yield remarkable results. Her words trailed off as a figure stepped forward from the shadows near the back of the room. It was Emily, clutching a tablet loaded with the digital dossier Marcus had prepared. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice rang out clear and steady. Mrs. Harper, Emily interrupted, drawing gasps from the audience. That's not true. A hush fell over the auditorium as all eyes turned to her. Harper froze mid-sentence, her composure cracking ever so slightly. Miss Carter, she said icily, regaining her footing. What is the meaning of this interruption? Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself against the wave of fear threatening to overwhelm her. You've accused me, and others, of cheating, lying, and misconduct without evidence. You've manipulated grades, intimidated students, and abused your power. But we have proof. She tapped the screen of her tablet, projecting documents onto the large display behind Harper. Emails detailing unethical practices, altered grade reports, and photos of bruised wrists flashed across the screen. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the audience absorbed the damning evidence. Harper's face flushed crimson, but she quickly masked her shock with indignation. This is preposterous, she exclaimed, pointing accusingly at Emily. These allegations are baseless, concocted by disgruntled students seeking revenge. Before she could continue, Mr. Willis stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Clad in his janitor uniform, he might have seemed out of place among the suits and polished appearances, but his voice carried undeniable weight. Actually, Principal Harper, he said calmly, holding up a folder filled with additional records. These aren't baseless. They're corroborated by multiple sources, including faculty members you've coerced into silence. Murmurs erupted throughout the room as Harper's mask of confidence began to crumble. Parents whispered furiously, teachers exchanged shocked glances, and even some board members leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Voices rise. Encouraged by Mr. Willis's support, other victims came forward, each sharing their own experiences. A former student recounted how Harper had suspended her for questioning a teacher's unfair grading policy. Another described being forced to transfer schools after refusing to participate in a fundraising scheme tied to private tutoring services. Each testimony painted a picture of systemic abuse hidden beneath the veneer of professionalism. Marcus joined the fray, demonstrating how he'd uncovered deleted emails and tampered files using forensic software. His technical expertise added credibility to their claims, leaving no room for denial. Through it all, Harper struggled to regain control, lashing out with accusations and deflections. "This is slander," she shouted, slamming her fist on the podium. "You're undermining the integrity of this institution." But her attempts to deflect only fueled the growing outrage. Even Ms. Rivera, who had previously warned Mr. Willis against meddling, spoke up. "I didn't want to believe it," she admitted, standing reluctantly. "But I can't ignore what's been presented here tonight. We need answers." The tide had turned decisively against Harper. What began as a routine meeting had transformed into a public reckoning, exposing years of unchecked misconduct. Betrayal unveiled. Just as it seemed Harper might collapse under the weight of accusations, she made a desperate move. Turning to the board, she leveled a finger at Mr. Willis. "And let's not forget the orchestrator of this charade, our very own janitor. Sam Willis has manipulated these students, feeding them lies and fabrications to further his own vendetta against me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. For a moment, doubt flickered across some faces in the audience. Could a low-level employee truly orchestrate such a sophisticated campaign? Or was Harper grasping at straws? Mr. Willis met her gaze steadily, unfazed by the attack. "If standing up for students makes me guilty, then yes, I'm guilty. But ask yourself this, Mrs. Harper. Why does a janitor know more about your actions than your own colleagues?" His response drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Harper's isolation became palpable as allies abandoned her, unwilling to associate with someone so clearly implicated in wrongdoing. Resolution and repercussions. With mounting pressure, the school board announced an immediate investigation into Harper's conduct, suspending her pending further review. The decision was met with applause from the audience, though Emily felt no sense of triumph, only relief that the truth had finally come to light. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Emily approached Mr. Willis, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "Thank you for everything." Mr. Willis smiled softly, patting her back. "You did it, kiddo. All I did was give you a little nudge." Nearby, Marcus packed up his equipment, grinning ear to ear. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits, huh? Guess tech skills pay off after all." Despite the victory, lingering questions remained. Would Harper face legal consequences? How deeply did her influence extend within the administration? And most importantly, how could Ridgewood High rebuild trust after such betrayal? For now, though Emily allowed herself a rare moment of peace, the battle wasn't entirely over, but for the first time in months, she felt hopeful. Change was possible, even when faced with overwhelming odds.